Hello, everyone, and welcome to Episode 9 of the Progress Report, a weekly program about local government and economic development in and around Green Bay and Brown County. I'm your host, Bill Meindl. A big thank you to Political Radar for creating, sponsoring, and producing this new show. It's a good time to talk about elections. Why? For one, April 3rd is Election Day throughout Brown County and Wisconsin. There'll be elections for city councils, county boards, village boards, town boards, judges, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and depending on where you live, school boards. Other contests are on the ballots as well, locally and around the state, plus a statewide referendum on whether to eliminate the office of state treasurer. Vote April 3rd. It's also a good time to talk elections because of numerous election-related developments happening statewide and nationally. For one, a judge has ordered a special elections to fill 2 state legislative vacancies, including one in our area. The judge's decision may be appealed and or new legislation passed designed to override it. Secondly, Wisconsin's legislative district maps drawn 7 years ago is under challenge in the U.S. Supreme Court amid charges of gerrymandering. There could be a decision on the case come June. Also, what was all that about when some residents in Brown County and around the state went to the polls in February and found their names had been removed from voter rolls? And finally, a federal investigation into possible foreign or domestic interference in the 2016 presidential election is underway. Wisconsin reportedly was among states targeted by hackers. Here to talk about how elections are handled in Brown County and what the role of the county in those elections is Brown County Clerk Sandy Juno. Welcome to the Progress Report, Sandy.
Thank you, Bill.
Let's start off right with what happened in February. As you know, some residents went to the polls in February. This was an issue you weren't directly involved in, but you may have some information about, and found that their names had been removed from the voting rolls. What happened? This was around in Brown County as well as around the state.
Correct. My understanding is that this is the first time that Wisconsin participated in a consortium with about 20 other states for comparing our voter rolls, and the whole intent is to try and clean them up. And what happened was the format that DMV had forwarded the files to this consortium called ERIC. It caused some errors in people that were inactivated that probably shouldn't have been.
Mm-hmm.
So the Elections Commission does have a plan in place for the April 3rd election. Polls will have supplemental voter lists with people that had been inactivated. So if they go to the polls on April 3rd and they're not on the regular poll list, the poll worker would check the supplemental list, and if their name appears on there, they wouldn't have to re-register. If their names don't appear on the supplemental list, then they would have to re-register.
So some action has been taken to try to counteract what happened in February?
Yes.
According to reporting, there were at least dozens that we know of in the Green Bay area, dozens of people who went to the polls and found their names were not on the list. So you multiply that around the state.
Yeah, those numbers are kind of hard. The State Elections Commission has only had about, I believe, 1,000 names that were submitted.
Okay.
Although I don't know if they're complete checking Milwaukee area. There are a couple things that could play a factor in that. Sometimes what happens after a 4 or 5 year cycle after the November election, people who haven't voted in over 5 years, they get sent a notice, and if they don't reply to it, then they become inactivated. And that was kind of the same thing with this mailing with the ERIC Consortium. People did get notices in the mail.
Postcards were sent out last November.
Yes. If they didn't reply to that postcard to keep them on the list, that's how they became inactivated. And I don't know that a postcard is necessarily the best way to notify individuals.
Sure.
Maybe a first-class mailing would have been better. But, people maybe just didn't realize the impact it would have by not responding.
Sure.
But, in any case, we hope to have all of this rectified on April 3rd.
And if someone does go to the polls in April and they find they're not on the list, what kind of documentation can they bring to prove their residency?
Probably the easiest is if you have a Wisconsin ID or a driver's license that has your correct address. That would be the ideal form to bring, simply because you need the proof of residency to register, but you're still going to need the photo ID to get a ballot.
So there's documentation you can bring, and you can get registered at the polls and get it cleared up.
Yes, that is correct.
Also, there's a 1-800 number, 1-866 number that people can call the Wisconsin Elections Commission. If you have any questions, you can call 1-866-868-3947. That's 1-866-868-3947. This is a big, broader question beginning here, Sandy, but elections are the responsibility of each municipality, right? But the county is involved in the election process at several points along the way.
Yes, basically, county government is an extension of state government. So we coordinate all of the elections from the municipalities on behalf of the state. In Brown County, we actually try and do everything that we can together, from creating legal notices into one insertion in the paper, as well as doing all of our programming of the memory sticks at the county level and printing of ballots. So we do a lot for our municipalities, and we find it to be easier for the residents to use because they have the same tabulation equipment that they're going to be using, and there's a huge cost savings by not having to support different types of equipment.
And the county also sends out advance notice of elections, correct?
Yes, we do. We have them posted on our website. There's a location for legal notices. We also do insertions in the Press Gazette, the Ashwaubenon Press, and the Denmark News.
And also the county is involved toward the end of the process, or at the end of the process, in tabulating the results.
Yes, on election night, all of the communities, with the exception of the city of Green Bay, will transmit their election results to us via telephone line. So it comes directly into our computer, into the program where the results are accumulated. The city of Green Bay actually brings their memory sticks into our office, and then we read them directly into the computer.
Being located across the street.
Yes, yes. So everything's pretty automated, and what's really nice is when you have an automated system is you have opportunities beforehand to test it, make sure everything's working correctly, and your ability to have an error is greatly reduced.
So that answers one of my questions. How do election results get from, say, the town of Morrison to your office on election night? Those results, for the most part, are phoned in.
Yep, it comes directly. The tabulator has a number set into it to dial to. It'll automatically dial up and go directly into our computer program, and then the results are transmitted. Of course, those results are encrypted, so that there's no way that anybody would be able to have access to those.
Sure.
But there is quite a bit of security on those.
Then the results are almost immediately posted on the county's website, correct?
Yes, we have to basically upload those onto our website. So sometimes it kind of depends on how many times we'll be refreshing those to bring those up. Sometimes what happens is we have a delay, especially with the city of Green Bay, because of how they bring their data in. We might not have very much activity out there, and then the next time you refresh it, everything might be there. So, we're kind of, can only do things as fast as what we get the results in. So,
voting machines are the responsibility, I believe, of each municipality. Are different types of machines used in each city, village, and town in Brown County, or are the machines uniformly the same?
Brown County has had the same equipment countywide since about 1999. When we went to upgrade our equipment back in 2013, our county board was very generous in purchasing our election tabulators for all of our communities. And that was really insightful on their part. All of them represent different parts of the county. It allowed us to get a better price on the equipment itself, and it seems to have worked out very well.
But these aren't the voting machines themselves that you're talking about.
Yes.
Well, they are.
They purchased all the tabulators for all the municipalities in Brown County.
So just so I have this squared away, Brown County arranges for the voting machines for all of the municipalities in Brown County.
Right. Brown County purchased them, so that Brown County owns them, and each municipality is assigned whatever number of tabulators they need for their polling locations.
And would you describe these machines as mechanical or electronic that are in use?
They're electronic. It's pretty much a computer.
And these machines that are currently in use date to 1999, you say?
No, we replaced our old equipment in 2013 with the more current models referred to as a DS200.
Okay.
And in these models, and in most of the models, no matter which vendor you're working with, they now have the capacity to scan the ballots. So that is one of the functions we do in addition to when the ballot goes into the machine, it not only collects the data, it also scans the images. So there is that capability of having a file with all the ballot images on it.
A $64,000 question, Sandy. Are the voting machines used in Brown County reliable, accurate, and secure?
Yes, I believe 100% in their accuracies. I've been working with our vendor for well over 20 years, and I have 100% confidence in the product that they put out.
Do all of the machines provide a paper backup of vote totals?
Yes. On the election tabulation equipment, any function that happens on that tabulator, whether it's if a ballot is returned to an elector because they overvoted, all of that is stored in its memory. So we have an accounting of every action that has taken place on that machine that we can rely on.
Early voting. What does the state of Wisconsin allow for early voting in advance of Election Day?
That law was changed. I believe it used to be 10 days prior to the election that they could early vote, but there was a ruling in November, or for the November election of 2016 that kind of removed that limit. So as soon as the municipal clerks have ballots available, as early as that, they can determine whether they want to start doing in-person voting. Obviously, they will send out their absentee ballots as soon as they get them. But that is really up to the municipality to determine what the hours and how many different locations they'll have in-person absentee voting available at.
Do they have parameters that the state has provided that within they can set up the early voting?
I think they have a cutoff of 7 p.m. For how late you can do that. And I think you can actually absentee vote up through the Sunday prior to the election. You can't on Monday, but Sunday before the election, if your municipality is offering those services, you could vote on Sunday as well.
I think what municipalities in Brown County are doing generally, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're providing for early voting at least the week before the election.
Yes, all of them are providing at least a week before, in many cases earlier than that.
Where in Brown County is early voting most expansive?
To go to more than one location, or are you just talking about the volume of people participating in early voting?
The number of hours that early voting is allowed.
Oh, is allowed. That's really up to the municipality to make that determination.
Mm-hmm.
I think it kind of depends on how they're staffed, and what their schedules are like. What we do prior to each election, we have to publish a notice of absentee voting, and in that we list the hours that the municipalities are available for early voting. Mm-hmm. And in some of the cases where they don't have regular hours, such as in many of the towns, they call and set up an appointment.
This may be an obvious question, but can a municipality expand early voting beyond what the state permits?
That would be kind of difficult because I'll tell you, it's always, clerks are always on a deadline to try and get those ballots to the clerks for absentee voting as soon as we can. So right now, for the most part, there really isn't a limit that you would go beyond, because right now, if once they get those absentee ballots, should they choose to start absentee voting in person, they can.
How many people, and I know it would vary from election to election, but vote by absentee ballot in Brown County?
Oh. For the November presidential election in 2016, Brown County had just under 45,000 absentee ballots cast.
No kidding, that many.
Yeah, and that continues to grow, and this is pretty much nationwide that it grows. Prior to changing the law back in, I believe it was 2000, where anybody could vote by absentee, before that you had to have a legitimate excuse, like you're in confined or something. At that time, for a presidential election, we'd have about 4,000 absentee ballots. So as you can see over the years, we're like over 1,000% increase in absentee voting. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think the candidates, the parties, everyone encourages people to get out and vote early. And I think it just kind of reflects our modern society. People like to take care of things when they have time to do it.
And is absentee voting done exclusively by mail?
No, you can do by mail or you can do in-person absentee voting at the clerk's office.
How does that differ from early voting, or would that be
It's the same.
the same?
Yeah, some refer to it as early voting, but really in Wisconsin, it's early voting by an absentee ballot.
Voter photo ID was passed by the Wisconsin legislature 7 years ago, but was challenged in court. Where does voter photo ID stand today? Is it in effect? Is it still undergoing legal challenge? Or is the decision final and photo ID in Wisconsin is here to stay?
I believe photo ID is here to stay in Wisconsin. It went through a much debated and legal process to get to this point, because I think it took us over 5 years from when it was first implemented, and then it was challenged in the courts, and then finally, it was settled in the courts that we could do photo ID. And I think that's because of the way Wisconsin has written the laws for photo ID. We're not requiring anybody to have to purchase a birth certificate and have to purchase a driver's license or an ID in order to be able to vote. Some states did have that, and their photo ID laws didn't stand in the courts.
Okay.
So I think Wisconsin law was well written, and when they did find that there might be ways to improve it, they did make those improvements. But in Brown County, we really haven't had much problem or issue with people providing photo IDs. As part of our legal notices, we always include photo ID information for our electors so that they come prepared. And we really don't have very many people that we send away from the polls to go home and get their photo ID. They, for the most part, come prepared.
So what if a voter doesn't have a driver's license or another form of an acceptable ID? What does he or she do to vote?
Well, the person would be required to get some form of ID, and there's a number of different IDs they can use. Schools, kids in college can use their college ID along with proof of enrollment, naturalization papers, veterans cards. I believe if you have a government employee ID, that could be part of your photo ID, a passport. So there's a number of different things that you can provide for photo ID.
And I believe the State Department of Transportation will issue a non-driver identification card for free if you ask.
Yes, that is correct.
So just go to the DMV and sign up and
Right.
get a non-voter identification card,
Mm-hmm.
non-driver identification card. Is a birth certificate required?
When you go to the DMV or if you're getting a passport in those cases, for sure you'd need a birth certificate. But what the state of Wisconsin does, for example, if I didn't have a birth certificate and I wanted to go in and get a free ID from the DMV, what I would do is list where I was born, and being Wisconsin, they would confirm that with the Department of Health and Human Services. So they would take care of checking that. They also do out-of-state checks for births that occur outside of the state. Those might take a little bit longer, to get fulfilled. In those cases, the applicant is given like a temporary paper that can be accepted at the polls in lieu of an actual photo ID.
Are there any other newer changes in state election laws that voters should be aware of, Sandy?
I'm trying to think of what we passed this year, and there really hasn't been a lot that has changed as far as voting goes. The only one that really comes to mind is now if a candidate wants a recount, they have to be within 1% of the vote of the winner. So that would kind of prevent a situation like we had when we had the presidential recount for the Stein campaign. That was well beyond the 1%. We would not be forced to go through and do a recount in that case.
So can you just state that again?
Okay, the law was changed, so now if you want to have a recount, you have to be within 1% of the
Within
vote
1%, okay.
of the winner. So if you're an outlier, such as what Jill Stein was, you couldn't request a recount even if you were paying for it. So it kind of limits, who can ask for a recount in that regard.
Sure. A couple of bigger picture questions here. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing a challenge of Wisconsin's legislative map drawn 7 years ago. Potentially, voting districts in the state could be redrawn for the 2018 or 2020 elections. If the U.S. Supreme Court should order redistricting, what might that mean for your office, Sandy?
Well, that would certainly mean that Brown County would need to come up with a lot of additional funds for that because there's a cost in making all of those changes.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly as far as budgeting goes, it would be helpful to know ahead of time, when we're doing the budget that we're going to need these funds, otherwise we're going to have to come up with it. But there would be a lot of work involved because all of our statewide voter registration system and anything linked to that's going to have to be changed. All of our coding processes for creating ballots and programming our memory sticks would have to be changed. So there'd be a lot of change that would be involved in that process.
Normally that's done every 10 years, correct?
Yeah, and it's something that no clerk looks forward to. I can assure you that, to make sure everybody's where they belong. So.
Just a lot of work, a lot of paperwork, a lot of electronic work.
Yes.
Just trying to figure out in which district everybody should be in.
And then, too, you want to make sure the candidates are getting their signatures in the right district as well. So
that's a massive undertaking as far as
it is. And, I think that's probably one of the best reasons we only do it every 10 years because it is. It's a huge process to do that, and it involves a lot of different areas of government, both municipal and county government and the state. So
I'm certainly not asking for any confidential or classified information, but has your office or other county clerks in the state received federal or state advisories, warnings, or say informational bulletins regarding hacking or interference in the elections process?
For Brown County, most of our notices will go through our technology services department, but yes, I have gotten some. And I know from attending conferences on the national level that Homeland Security has made some changes that will actually allow them to become more involved with the monitoring of elections, whereas before they were somewhat limited because they kind of came under the category of government in general. Mm-hmm. But that's been changed, so they will have more involvement and be working more directly with states, county and municipal clerks.
So the county, for one, is receiving information from the Department of Homeland Security.
Correct.
Any other agencies that you can think of that have been in touch with the county?
Mostly the stuff that we get comes through Homeland Security or the Wisconsin Elections Commission.
Turnout. Sandy, do you have a prediction for turnout in the April 3rd election? 20%, 30%, something else?
Well, I'd like to think it'd be 20%, but our trend as of late in non-presidential primary years tends to be anywhere from 18 to 20%. My guess is it's probably going to fall in that area. It all depends, on how many of the electors get out to vote, how much interest there is. I certainly hope that there's a lot, but spring elections typically aren't one of our highest elections.
Where does Brown County rank in voting? Does Brown County, are voters more reliable to vote in here compared to the rest of the state, or are we about average?
It's rather difficult to say because when we calculate our percentages, it's based on the estimated number of eligible voters in a county or a municipality. So it's a pretty broad number that you're looking at. So the numbers always tend to be, somewhat low. Now, if you're looking at a percentage based upon the number of people that are registered to vote, that number is going to be somewhat higher.
Sure.
I don't know how other counties or municipalities' percentages are. I know typically when I give a percentage, it usually falls within whatever the state elections commission is expecting statewide.
Are you pretty good on your predictions of turnout?
Generally, I am, because I go back and I look at the history and I figure out what the average is. And unless there's something highly unusual, you can pretty much come within 1% or 2%.
There are some contested races, as you know, for city council, county board, and elsewhere, and that would seem to draw more voter turnout, but still it'll certainly be less than 50% the turnout.
I would believe you're right. Usually a good referendum will draw people out, if it's statewide. So,
what does a presidential election draw in Brown County?
Percentages of estimated eligible voters, typically, like 69 to 72, 73%.
That's about as high as it gets.
Generally.
And that's it for episode 9 of the Progress Report. Thank you, Sandy, for being on the program.
You're welcome.
And thanks to executive producer Dan Jones, producer Jacob Jones, producer Darian Goheen, editor Christian Rivera, technician Serena Waryak. Be sure to subscribe to Political Radar on YouTube, join the Political Radar community group on Facebook, and you can support this show financially by purchasing Political Radar merchandise from our shop. Support your local newspapers. This episode of the Progress Report was recorded March 28th, 2018. Thanks for watching. See you next week.